Well, Isaiah is writing to a people that are in exile. This is after the three great kings of Saul, David, and Solomon, and then the succession of kings that created trouble in Israel and Judah split into two countries after the death of Solomon, and eventually Assyria overthrows the northern kingdom, and Babylon overthrows the southern kingdom, and the people now are in exile away from their homeland, but they still have hope. And part of the hope that they have is the hope of the promise that comes through the prophets. The prophets continue to hold them together, to allow their very religion to be that which continues to unite them, even in the midst of this kind of challenging situation. And so when we hear these words of Isaiah come to the people, he comes and brings them a word that's not really new to them, because they heard this word even before they were in exile. When they weren't following the commands of God to care for the poor and the needy, the prophets were telling them continuously that if they don't take care of the least of those among them, that they'll never hold themselves together as a people. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. So now they find themselves in exile, and they're wondering, what do we do now? What could we possibly do to find ourselves back into God's favor? And Isaiah tells them once again how simple this really is, as he talks to them about offering food to the hungry, satisfying the needs of the afflicted. And then he tells them that if they do so, that their light shall rise in the darkness. What a wonderful way to think about what it means to live like that, for your light to rise in the darkness. Now, if you are all alone and you have a light, you light a candle, or in modern day terms, a flashlight, or more likely your cell phone, that you would simply turn that light on, that could be enough light for you. It could be enough that you could say, well, now I can see my way around, but it's really just for you. What's far more exciting is when somebody else needs your light. When somebody else says, does anybody have a candle? Does anybody have a flashlight? You may have been in situations when the power goes out in your home and other people are there. The hero is the person to first stumble across a flashlight. The hero is the first one that can find the candle and light it, because when they do so, it's not as if that light can be guarded. It's not as if that light is just for them, but when that light is lit, everybody experiences the joy of being able to see around their surroundings. Everybody experiences the joy of having the comfort of the light in their midst. And that's what Isaiah was saying to these people. Not so much of what they're going to be able to do to get themselves out of a circumstance, but the joy that they're going to find when they bring somebody else out of a troubling situation. And so when we hear that they will be like light rising in the darkness, then they might have had a question. Well, what happens if I give too much away? I mean, what happens if I become the person who one day becomes hungry? What happens if I become the person who becomes needy? And I'll look back at the time when I helped others out and think, oh no, I should have saved that for myself. I should have kept that for my own comfort, for my own desires. If only I would have managed to store that up for myself, maybe I'd have some now. And Isaiah gets to them before they can even complete that thought, because he says to them that the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places. And that's the real joy of understanding what it means to turn ourselves over to what God calls from us, because God continues to supply us over and over and over again. And it's true, we might be that person that one day finds ourselves hungry, but we'll also know, because we chose to feed others, that they'll probably reach out to us. If we chose to satisfy someone else's needs, they'll be reaching out to us in our times of need. That's what it means to live in a community. That's what it means to look out for one another, knowing that God is continually looking to resupply us so that we can reach out to the world, to the needs that the world has. And we can be the very people that a prophet would look at and say, that right there, that's what God desires. That right there is what God is waiting for people to understand, what possibly the power of God could be doing. And so then we hear, as he goes on, and the wonderful imagery that Isaiah uses to talk about this, that we'll be like springs of water that never fail. That's the way we're going to be able to care for one another. That these foundations that we will raise up in one person, they'll be there for generations. And then Isaiah has this great line, "You shall be called the repairer of the breach." That you're going to be called to somebody who brings restoration to the gap that's out there. And the gap that he's talking about is the gap that happens between what we have and what other people need. And it does not mean that in the midst of that somehow we'll give up everything and everything we have will go to other people. Not at all. Isaiah's just talking about the basic human needs that people have to be able to understand even the most foundational blessings of God. If there's anything sad about this proclamation, it's that we still have a breach in our world today, that we continue to look and see what that breach means. Around our fellowship hall this morning, you're going to see a lot of statistics about local hunger, about world hunger. I want to share some of them with you now. This is exactly what we're talking about when Isaiah talks about being the repairer of the breach. There are as many as 811 million people around the world who are undernourished. 811 million people who are undernourished. That's part of the breach. In our local area in 2021, those who deal with food insecurity. In Colorado, 672,800 people, over 11% of the population just in the state of Colorado, are food insecure. In Denver County, right around us, that's over 13% of the population are food insecure. And 1 in 3 people in Colorado lack reliable access to nutritious food. 1 in 3 lack reliable access to nutrition food, and 1 in 6 children in Colorado are not getting the nutrition they need on a daily basis. When you talk about the breach and the gap, this is the amazing thing. The world produces more food today than it has at any point in human history. More than enough food to feed every person. But the number of people experiencing hunger is growing. And when you look around the world, $2 a day can have a significant impact toward the sustainable solutions that don't just feed someone, but actually will work toward ending hunger and poverty. That doesn't seem like a tremendous gap. When we look at what we can do here locally, just $25 provides a week's worth of nutritious groceries to a family of 4. That's the power that Metro Caring has in the way they purchase. $25 can feed a family of 4 for a week. And then when we would look at this again, globally, $75 can sponsor a community member to take leadership development. So not just putting food in someone's hands for a day, but actually training them up so they can become a leader in their community. And $100 can provide emergency food bags to 10 families when we look at that globally. When we look at that kind of breach and we see what's happening on a Super Bowl of Caring Day, and we realize what simple, small gifts add up to for a community, it's really quite incredible. And we wonder, when would be the day that a pastor will get up to read this passage from Isaiah, and they'll read something like, you shall be called the repairer of the breach, and not know what anybody's talking about, because people actually have enough to eat, and they have clean water. Man, I'd love to see the day where I'd be stymied as a pastor to not even know how to talk about that anymore. It'll happen when we hear the words of Jesus, and when the church becomes a model for what happens in the world. When Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth. And he goes on with that phrase, salt lost its saltiness, it's just tossed out and trampled underfoot. We also realize something about salt when it comes to promoting the way of God and what Jesus means in the world. We all know what it's been like to have the head of your salt shaker fall off as you're trying to put a little bit of salt on food, and too much comes out and you try to eat it anyway. And you try to scrape some off and you go, salt is really joyful in the right amount. And unfortunately, the church has not always been joyful about the salt we throw at the world. Sometimes we want to take a dump truck of salt and dump it onto people. And we know that too much salt can actually harden your arteries. Too much talking about God in ways that seem judgmental toward people, or that don't allow them to be their true self, that's the kind of salt that hardens people away from God. What we really want to see is the kind of salt that enhances someone's life, that actually creates more in them because it creates more in us. That's when Jesus picks up on these same words of Isaiah, to let your light shine. When our light shines among people, they actually see the glory of God that comes from somebody, and they see how it can be a part of their life well. That's what the church is called to be today. Light that actually brings joy into people's lives, not that tells them how wrong they are about a choice that they have made. When Jesus finishes up, he talks about the kingdom of heaven. Whoever follows the commandments and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. You could go back to the 10 commandments. I think we simply go back to what the prophets have been telling people from time eternal. Be light in a place that brings joy. Bring salt in a place that enhances somebody's life but doesn't overpower them. Allow them to simply see that the joy of Christ can be in their life the same way it is in yours, but invite them in to that joy. Then your righteousness might actually exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, because the scribes and Pharisees, they wanted to do everything just to fulfill certain laws. Jesus said, don't do it to fulfill the law. Do it because your neighbor is in need. Do it because your neighbor needs to see the light of Christ alive in you. Do it because your neighbor's life can be enhanced. That's what happens when we restore the breach. When simple gifts are brought together and people are able to see that the light of Christ does something as simple as it feeds someone. That the joy of Christ, that's the interesting thing. The joy of Christ enters into someone's life when they're handed a bowl of soup. The joy of Christ enters your life when you become the light that provides that bowl of soup. Amen. As we enter into our day, it looks like we might